out there.
Let's turn to the political turmoil in Venezuela. The U.S. has backed self-proclaimed acting President Juan Guaido against Nicolas Maduro. Here's what freshman Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, who just landed a spot on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, had to say, quote, "A U.S.-backed coup in Venezuela is not a solution to the dire issues they face. Trump's efforts to install a far-right opposition will only incite violence and further destabilize the region," unquote. What's your response to the Congresswoman?
This is not a U.S.-backed anything. I didn't see any Americans in the street in Venezuela when hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Venezuelans took to the streets on the 23rd. This is Juan Guaido and the National Assembly, which was lawfully elected under the Constitution of Venezuela. By the way, a constitution put in place by Hugo Chavez. They followed the Constitution that said the election in January was invalid. The swearing in January was invalid because the election that put Maduro there was invalid. When there's a vacancy in the presidency, the president of the National Assembly, which happens to be Juan Guaido, becomes the interim president, and in the next 30 to 45 days, he has to call for new elections. That was all their law. They followed that. The U.S. simply supported the democratic institutions, along with, by the way, 16 countries in the region. This is not the U.S. This is Honduras. This is Guatemala. This is Canada, Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not a U.S.-sponsored anything. This is us supporting the people of Venezuela who want their constitution and democracy followed. That's a fact. And if people choose to ignore it because they don't like Donald Trump, that's silly.
I know that no decisions have been made, and I know that efforts are being made to avoid any sort of military action by the U.S. in Venezuela, but you have said that all options should be on the table, including potentially U.S. military force, if Maduro doesn't back down, if U.S. diplomats in Venezuela are at risk. How would you explain to the families of American service members why it's worth potentially risking their lives to go to Venezuela?
Well, first of all, I don't know of anyone who's calling for military intervention. What I'm calling for is for the Constitution to be followed, for military officials in Venezuela to follow and uphold the Constitution they swore allegiance to, for Juan Guaido to be able to act as interim president until we have a new valid election so we can support that new democratic government. That's what I'm calling for. The United States always retains the right, always, anywhere in the world, in any instance, to protect its national security. So I'm not going to justify military intervention because I don't know who's calling for that. What I've said is everything is an option because we always have an option of defending our national security in cases where it's threatened. Why we should care about Venezuela is a different topic. It is in our national interest to care. Why? They allow the ELN and other drug trafficking networks to flood our country with cocaine and drugs. They've invited the Russians repeatedly to open military installations in our own hemisphere. And they are destabilizing the entire region. 700,000 migrants in Peru, over 1.5 million to 2 million in Colombia. This is a regional catastrophe. Another 2 million Venezuelans this year could go into different countries, further destabilizing these nations who happen to be allies and key partners in the anti-war counter-drug effort. So this is in our national interest to care about what's happening there, and it's always in our national interest to support people, especially in our hemisphere, who are put